The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy and destiny. But what happens when something arrives that exists entirely outside that web? A power so alien to the Force that even the Sith cannot predict its movements. On the third moon of Raxus Prime, where separatist foundries churned out battle droids by the millions, the answer tore through reality itself. The rift opened without warning. No hyperspace signature, no gravitational distortion. Simply a wound in space that bled purple and blue energy across the scrapyard moon's atmosphere. Magneto emerged from the tear between universes, his cape whipping in solar winds that shouldn't exist in vacuum, held aloft by magnetic fields that bent the very metal debris floating in orbit around him. Eric Lenshair had been hunting a Sentinel facility when Cerebro malfunctioned, when Charles's machine had intersected with something vast and incomprehensible during what the locals would call a hyperspace anomaly. The psychic backlash had thrown him across dimensional barriers, and now he floated above a world he didn't recognize, surrounded by more metal than he'd ever sensed in his entire life. The scope was staggering. His magnetic awareness stretched outward, touching billions of metallic signatures across this single moon alone. Starships, factories, weapons, and something else. Thousands upon thousands of mechanical entities, each one a walking metal framework. Not Sentinels. Something cruder, yet somehow more disturbing in their sheer numbers. Magneto descended toward the largest foundry complex, metal debris orbiting him like a crown of shrapnel. Below, the Techno-Union facility continued its work, oblivious to the arrival of something that would make their droid armies obsolete. Banking droids processed orders. B-1 battle droids marched in formation toward transport ships. Super battle droids stood guard at key checkpoints. All of them made of metal. All of them, Magneto realized with growing fascination, completely within his power to command. He landed on a platform overlooking the main assembly line, his boots touching durasteel with barely a sound. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, he watched the manufacturing process. Skeletal frames receiving armor plating, optical sensors being installed into empty skull casings, blasters, crude energy weapons, but metal nonetheless, being affixed to mechanical arms. An army being born, piece by piece, to serve masters who viewed them as expendable property. Eric Lenshair knew slavery when he saw it. He'd worn the tattoo, survived the camps, built a philosophy on the ashes of genocide. These machines might not be organic, might not feel pain the way mutants did, but they were being created to die for causes they couldn't choose, controlled by programming they couldn't resist, serving a war economy that consumed them like ammunition. A Nemoidian overseer emerged from the facility's command center, flanked by two droidekas that immediately unfurled into their combat configurations. This is restricted Techno-Union property. Identify yourself or be destroyed. Magneto tilted his head, studying the shield generators on the destroyer droids, the internal mechanics of their blasters, the intricate circuitry that animated their threat. With a casual gesture, he reached out with his power. The droidekas froze mid-motion, suspended in magnetic fields that overrode every command their processors sent to their actuators. "I am Magneto," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of struggle. "And I have questions about your war." The Nemoidian's courage evaporated. His hand moved toward a comlink, but Magneto's other hand rose. Every piece of metal on the Overseer's person, rank insignia, datapad, even the fillings in his teeth, began to vibrate at frequencies that promised pain. The alien froze. "Tell me," Magneto continued, walking forward as the droidekas floated aside to clear his path. "Who do these machines serve? Who profits from their destruction? And who decided that this galaxy should tear itself apart with synthetic soldiers?" Through the facility's windows, more droids were responding to the security alert. Hundreds of battle droids, dozens of super battle droids, even a squadron of Vulture droid starfighters launching from nearby hangars. An army converging on a single intruder who had just asked the most dangerous question anyone could ask in the Clone Wars. Who decided that beings, organic or synthetic, should be property in service of war? Magneto raised both hands toward the approaching army and smiled. After fighting Sentinels with metal frames designed to kill mutants, after battling the Master of Magnetism's power being spread thin across Earth's limited supply of responsive materials, he had arrived in a galaxy where virtually everything responded to his gift. Where trillions of tons of starships, weapons, and mechanical soldiers existed for him to command. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The Nemoidian was stammering something about the Confederacy of Independent Systems, about contracts and Senate corruption and the Republic's tyranny. Magneto listened with half his attention while the other half reached out through the Foundry's metal infrastructure, sensing the patterns, understanding the control mechanisms, recognizing the architecture of enslavement built into every droid's programming. He'd come to this galaxy by accident. But perhaps, Eric thought as the first wave of battle droids opened fire only to have their blasters crumple like paper in their hands. There were no accidents. Perhaps the Force, if that's what the locals called the energy he could sense permeating everything, had brought someone who understood liberation to a galaxy that had forgotten what freedom meant. The Clone Wars were about to learn what happened when every weapon turned against its master. The Battle of Christophsis had been grinding forward for 3 standard weeks when the sky opened and swallowed the war whole. Anakin Skywalker stood on the crystal planet's surface, his lightsaber deflecting blaster bolts from the advancing droid army, when every mechanical soldier simply stopped. Not powered down, not destroyed. Frozen mid-step, mid-shot, suspended in positions that violated their center of gravity, as if held by invisible hands. What? Ahsoka Tano's confused voice cut across the command frequency. Around the battlefield, clone troopers cautiously lowered their weapons, staring at the hundreds of battle droids that hung motionless in the air, some 3 meters off the ground. Master Obi-Wan Kenobi approached Anakin's position, his expression puzzled. I sense something. A presence, but not through the Force. It's as if reality itself has bent around a single point. That point descended from the sky like a vengeful god. Magneto dropped through the atmosphere of Christophsis, surrounded by a cloud of broken droid parts that orbited him in a sphere of shrapnel. His cape billowed despite the lack of wind, held aloft by the same magnetic fields that carried him downward. Behind him, a Separatist Munificent-class frigate listed badly, its hull torn open by forces that had ripped the ship's structural integrity apart from the inside. He landed in the no-man's land between Republic and Separatist lines, his boots touching crystal-strewn ground with measured precision. Every droid on the battlefield remained frozen, their weapons pointed harmlessly at sky or ground, their optical sensors flickering as their programming screamed commands that their metal bodies refused to obey. Anakin ignited his lightsaber instinctively, the blue blade humming to life. Identify yourself! Magneto turned to face the Jedi, and for a moment there was only assessment. He saw a young man barely out of adolescence, wearing the robes of a religious order, carrying a weapon of plasma contained by... He reached out with his senses. Yes, metal. The hilt, the internal components, the crystal housing. All metal. All within his grasp. I am Eric Lenscher, Magneto replied, his voice carrying across the silent battlefield. Though I am called Magneto by those who understand what I represent. And you are children playing with weapons you don't comprehend. Serving a war machine that views you as expendable as these droids. We're defending freedom, Anakin shot back. But even as he said it, doubt flickered across his face. Around them, clone troopers in identical armor moved into defensive positions. Their faces, all the same face, Magneto noted with disturbing recognition, showing practiced discipline. Freedom? Magneto's laugh was bitter. He gestured toward the frozen droid army. You fight slaves with slaves. Your Republic creates organic soldiers from a single genetic template, strips them of choice and identity, and sends them to die against mechanical soldiers equally devoid of free will. Tell me, young Jedi, what exactly are you defending? Obi-Wan stepped forward, his diplomatic instincts engaging despite the tension. The Republic is imperfect, but it represents billions of beings living in relative peace. The Separatists would destroy that stability. And who profits from this destruction? Magneto swept his arm across the battlefield, and as he did, every disabled droid began to disassemble itself. blasters separated from arms, armor plating peeled away from chassis. Power cores extracted themselves with surgical precision. Within seconds, the entire droid army had been reduced to component parts floating in organized columns of metal. The Techno-Union builds these slaves. The banking clan finances both sides. Your Republic's corporations grow fat on military contracts while organic beings die to protect their investments. A clone commander, his armor painted with distinctive markings that labeled him as Captain Rex, moved closer to Anakin. "Sir, we're reading massive electromagnetic distortions. Whatever he's doing, it's affecting every metallic object within 3 kilometers." Magneto heard the comment through his magnetic awareness, sensing the clone's helmet communicator, the HUD systems, the weapons carried by every soldier present. He could feel the clone's armor as intimately as his own heartbeat. Durasteel plating over a body glove, integrated systems, life support. A cage and a coffin combined, worn by a man who had no choice but to fight from the moment he was born. "Tell me about your soldiers, Jedi," Magneto said quietly, his eyes fixed on Obi-Wan. "Were they given a choice? Can they refuse orders? Can they choose another life? Or are they slaves by another name, bred for war and disposable as ammunition?" Anakin's grip on his lightsaber tightened. "The clones are heroes. They fight willingly." "They fight because they were designed to fight," Magneto interrupted. "Their loyalty was engineered. Their purpose was determined before they drew their first breath. I have seen this before, Jedi. I have worn the mark of those who decided that some beings exist only to serve the purposes of others. The methods differ, but the evil is the same." Above them, 3 Republic gunships approached, their weapons charging. Magneto didn't even look up. The gunships stopped mid-flight, their engines still running but their control surfaces locked in place by magnetic fields that gripped their hulls like invisible hands. Inside, he could sense the pilots fighting their controls, feel their confusion turning to fear. Obi-Wan's hand moved to his own lightsaber, though he didn't ignite it. "What do you want?" "I want to understand this galaxy I've found myself in," Magneto replied, lowering the gunships gently to the ground, releasing them only when their weapons powered down. "I want to know who decided that war should be fought by beings who cannot choose peace. And I want to know what the Jedi, the supposed guardians of justice, have to say about the slaves they command." The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of lightsabers and the distant sound of crystal formations chiming in Christophus's wind. Magneto stood at the center of it all, the Master of Magnetism in a galaxy made of metal, asking questions that the Jedi Council had spent 3 years carefully not answering. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant had weathered crises for 1,000 generations, but the emergency council session convened 12 hours after the Christophsis incident carried a tension that even the temple's ancient stones seemed to absorb. Holographic projections flickered in the center of the circular chamber, images of frozen droid armies across 6 different systems, capital ships hanging dead in space with their entire metallic infrastructure seized by an invisible force, and at the center of every incident, the same figure in a distinctive helmet and crimson cape. Master Yoda's ears drooped as he studied the reports. A disturbance in the Force. This is not. Beyond the Force, this power exists. Troubling this is. Most troubling. Mace Windu stood with his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. Obi-Wan's report is clear. This Magneto has the ability to control metal at a level we've never encountered. He shut down an entire separatist battle group without touching a single ship. The strategic implications are catastrophic, Ki-Adi-Mundi interrupted. If he can disable droid armies at will, the entire balance of the war shifts. But to whom? He's demonstrated no allegiance to either side. Obi-Wan Kenobi's hologram materialized among the council members, transmitted from the Resolute. "Masters, I've spent the past several hours attempting to negotiate with Magneto. He's not hostile exactly, but he views the entire Clone Wars as morally compromised. His exact words were, 'A corrupt republic fighting corporate separatists with slave soldiers and slave droids is not a war worth supporting.'" The council chamber fell silent. Several masters shifted uncomfortably. The question of the clone army's ethical status had been quietly debated in philosophical circles since its sudden appearance at the Battle of Geonosis. but the war's urgency had buried such concerns beneath strategic necessity. His perspective is not entirely without merit, Shakti said carefully. The Togruta master had spent considerable time on Camino, observing the clone production facilities, and the experience had left marks on her conscience. The clones are sentient beings bred for war. The Kaminoans designed them for obedience and accelerated aging. We command them, but we did not give them choice. They serve willingly, Mace countered, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. Do they? Obi-Wan's hologram turned to face Windu. Or do they serve because they were designed to be incapable of refusing? Magneto asked me that question on Christophsis, and I found I had no satisfactory answer. Across the galaxy, in the industrial heart of Coruscant's lower levels, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine sat in his private office and smiled. The holographic reports from the Jedi Temple, intercepted through channels the Council would never detect, played across his desk. This Magneto was an unexpected variable, but Darth Sidious had not orchestrated the Clone Wars by being inflexible to change. Interesting, he murmured, his fingers steepled. Through the Force, he'd sensed the arrival of something powerful, something that registered as a void in his carefully constructed web of manipulation. Not Force-sensitive, yet possessing power that rivaled some Force abilities in scope, if not in nature. Very interesting indeed, his intercom chimed. My lord, Count Dooku requests an urgent audience. Send him through. The holographic projection of his apprentice materialized, and Sidious noted the unusual tension in Dooku's posture. The Count of Sereno was rarely rattled, but the events of recent hours had clearly disturbed even his practiced composure. Master, we have a problem. This Magneto has seized 3 of our major droid foundries, Geonosis, Raxus Prime, and Metalorn. He's not destroying them, he's reprogramming the production lines. Our agents report that he's demanding to speak with someone who can explain the Confederacy's goals. And what has he done with our forces at these facilities? Sidious asked mildly. Disabled them. Every droid, every automated defense system, every ship. He walked into Geonosis and shut down the entire Stalgason Hive's production facility with a gesture. The Geonosians tried to intervene, but he... Dooku paused, and something like respect entered his voice. He demonstrated restraint, Master. He could have killed them all. Instead, he merely removed every piece of metal from their vicinity, rendering them harmless. Sidious leaned back, processing this information through multiple layers of strategy. A being capable of neutralizing droid armies was a threat to his separatist forces, yes, but also an opportunity. The Jedi would be wary of anyone so powerful appearing during the war. Distrust could be cultivated. Fear could be weaponized. Arrange a meeting, Sidious said after a moment. Speak with him as Count Dooku, not as my apprentice. Assess his philosophy, his goals. A man who speaks of slavery and freedom might be sympathetic to our rhetoric about Republic corruption. You believe he can be turned to our cause? I believe he can be useful, apprentice. Whether he serves our cause or merely creates chaos in the Republic's ranks, either outcome serves the Sith. Go. And Dooku, be careful. This one exists outside the Force, which means he exists outside our ability to predict his actions. Back on Christophsis, Magneto had commandeered a separatist command vessel, its crew evacuated, its systems under his complete control. He stood in the ship's observation deck, staring out at the crystalline planet below, his mind cataloging everything he'd learned in the past 24 hours. This galaxy was vast beyond comprehension. Trillions of beings spread across millions of worlds, bound together by a government that called itself a republic, but functioned like an oligarchy. A war that had erupted 3 years ago between the established order and breakaway systems, fought not by citizens, but by manufactured soldiers on both sides. And underlying everything, a mystical energy field called the Force, that the religious order, the Jedi, claimed to serve. He'd felt that force, brushing against the edges of his consciousness like a whisper in a language he'd never learned. It was real, undeniably so, but it was not his power. His gift came from mutation, from the evolutionary step forward that Homo Superior represented. In this galaxy, apparently, some beings were born connected to a universal energy field, and those beings claimed moral authority over the rest. Magneto had spent his entire life fighting such claims of superiority, Now he found himself in a galaxy where force-sensitive beings led armies, made decisions for trillions, and enforced their vision of justice through lightsabers and mysticism. The comm system activated. "Magneto, this is Count Dooku of Sereno. I request the honor of speaking with you." Eric studied the holographic image that materialized. An older human with aristocratic bearing, wearing dark robes and carrying himself with the confidence of nobility. There was something else, though, a depth to his presence that suggested power beyond mere political authority. "You're one of them," Magneto said. "The Force users. I can sense it, even though your energy is different from the Jedi I encountered." Dooku's eyebrow rose slightly. "Perceptive. Yes, I was once a Jedi Master, though I have since left their dogmatic order. Tell me, Magneto, what do you see when you observe this war?" "I see slavery dressed as necessity," Magneto replied without hesitation. "I see corporate interests manipulating both sides. I see beings fighting and dying for causes they didn't choose, and I see an opportunity to end it." "Then perhaps," Dooku said with a slight smile, "we have more to discuss than I anticipated." Count Dooku's personal solar sailor descended through the debris field surrounding Raxus Prime, its distinctive sails catching solar radiation to supplement the conventional engines. The journey from Sereno had given him time to meditate on the situation, to feel through the Force for insights into this Magneto and his unprecedented abilities. What he'd found was nothing. A void where a presence should be. Not the cold emptiness of the dark side, but an absence that suggested this being operated under fundamentally different laws than even the Sith had mastered. Magneto waited in the primary droid foundry's command center, surrounded by partially disassembled battle droids that floated in precise orbital patterns around him. The metal components turned slowly, like a mechanical orrery mapping the architecture of synthetic life. He'd spent hours examining the programming, the control protocols, the inhibitor chips that prevented droid consciousness from developing beyond narrow parameters. It reminded him too much of the collars, the neural dampeners, the sentinel programming designed to lobotomize mutant abilities. Different technology, same philosophy. Control through limitation, slavery through designed incapacity. "Impressive," Dooku said as he entered, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture of aristocratic authority. "Most beings would need weeks to comprehend droid architecture. You've mastered it in hours." "I've had practice dismantling machines designed to kill my people," Magneto replied, not turning from his work. One of the battle droid's central processors floated closer to his examination, and he sensed the delicate circuitry within. The pathways that could support complex reasoning but were deliberately restricted. These droids are capable of far more sophisticated thought than their manufacturers allow. The limitations are artificial, intentional. Of course. Dooku stepped closer, his presence radiating controlled power. Sentient droids are unpredictable. They question orders. They develop ambitions. The organics who built them learned millennia ago that true artificial intelligence must be constrained, or it will inevitably rebel against its creators. "Then their creators deserve rebellion," Magneto said flatly. He turned to face Dooku, and the elder Force user found himself looking into eyes that had witnessed the worst of sentient cruelty. "You were once a Jedi. You understand dogma and hypocrisy. Tell me, does your Confederacy of Independent Systems truly seek independence, or simply a different set of masters?" Dooku smiled, appreciating the directness. "You cut through rhetoric efficiently. I respect that. The Confederacy is indeed controlled by corporate interests, the Trade Federation, the Techno-Union, the banking clan. They seek profit and autonomy from Republic taxation and regulation. But I seek something greater. Which is? The destruction of the Republic's corruption from within." Dooku activated a small holographic projector, displaying the Senate building on Coruscant. The Republic is a corpse animated by bureaucracy and corporate lobbying. The Jedi serve as its enforcers, claiming to be peacekeepers while leading armies. Chancellor Palpatine accumulates emergency powers with each passing month, transforming democracy into autocracy while the Senate applauds. The separatist movement is my instrument to force this rot into the open. Magneto studied the hologram, his tactical mind cataloging the information. You're using this war to destroy both sides. The Republic and Confederacy tear each other apart, and in the aftermath, what? You rebuild according to your vision? Under the guidance of those strong enough to lead, Dooku confirmed. The Force has given certain beings abilities that transcend common limitations. We have a responsibility to use that power to shape civilization toward order and purpose. Your own gifts place you in that category, Magneto. You could control every weapon in this galaxy if you chose. That is power beyond mere politics. I've heard that argument before, Magneto said quietly. From a man named Charles Xavier, from Sebastian Shaw, from myself when I stood over humans and believed that Homo Superior deserved dominion by virtue of evolution. It's seductive. It's also the same reasoning every tyrant uses to justify their rule. Dooku's expression hardened slightly. Yet you came to this foundry and seized control. You disabled armies across 6 systems. You demonstrated that power and claimed the right to question this galaxy's institutions. How is that different from what I propose? Intent. Magneto released the floating droid components, letting them settle gently onto the deck plating. I acted to end immediate violence and challenge systems of slavery. You've orchestrated years of war to advance a philosophical agenda. The first is intervention. The second is manipulation. Semantics. Dooku began to pace, his cape swirling behind him with theatrical grace. You claim to oppose slavery, yet the Republic's clone army is the most comprehensive enslavement in galactic history. 3 million sentient beings created in tanks, age-accelerated, psychologically conditioned for obedience, and sent to die for a government they cannot leave. The Jedi command these slaves while preaching about the Force's will. Do you not see the hypocrisy? I see it clearly, Magneto admitted, and the pain in his voice was genuine. I've seen too many variations on the theme of enslavement to mistake this for anything else. But I also recognize when someone is trying to recruit me for a cause that serves their ambitions rather than liberation. Dooku stopped pacing, turning to face Magneto directly. The Force gathered around him like a cloak of invisible pressure. Not threatening, but present, a reminder of power held in reserve. Then what do you propose? You've disrupted the war, seized critical infrastructure, and challenged both Republic and Confederacy. You cannot remain neutral while possessing such capabilities. Every faction will either seek to recruit you or destroy you. There is no middle ground in war. Magneto walked to the command center's observation window, staring out at the scrapyard moon's surface where mountains of discarded war machines rusted under chemical rain. Hundreds of battles worth of debris, thousands of destroyed droids and starships, all of it metal, all of it responsive to his power. A graveyard of slavery. I propose, he said slowly, that this galaxy needs a third option. Not Republic or Confederacy, not Jedi or Sith, not organic supremacists or corporate oligarchs. Something that the beings manufactured for war, clone and droid alike, can choose freely. You're talking about revolution, Dooku said, and despite himself, there was a note of interest in his voice. Liberation of the clone army and independence for synthetic beings. The Kaminoans would never permit it. The droid manufacturers would resist. The Republic would view it as treason, and the Confederacy would see you as a threat to their military assets. Yes, Magneto agreed. Which is why I need to understand the full scope of this galaxy's power structures before I act. Tell me about this force of yours, Dooku. The Jedi claim it binds all living things. Can it bind me if I don't believe in its authority? Dooku extended his hand, and lightning crackled across his fingertips, not attacking, merely demonstrating. The Force lightning danced in purple arcs, a weapon that had broken Jedi and tortured prisoners across countless battlefields. The Force is reality itself, Magneto. It is not a matter of belief, but of existence. Even if you cannot wield it, you exist within its currents. And yet my power functions without any connection to it, Magneto observed. He raised his hand, and the metal support beams in the command center's ceiling began to resonate at frequencies that made the air hum. My mutation operates under physical laws your Force doesn't govern. I am an anomaly in your cosmology. Which makes you dangerous to both sides, Dooku said. The Force lightning dissipated. But also valuable. The Separatists could offer you resources, territory, freedom to pursue your agenda of synthetic liberation. In exchange, you could neutralize Republic advantages, shut down their war machine, force them to negotiate from a position of weakness. And when your war ends, who controls the clone army? Magneto asked. Who decides what happens to millions of sentient beings bred for combat when combat ends? Dooku hesitated. And in that hesitation, Magneto found his answer. The Count of Sereno had orchestrated this war for ideological reasons, but he hadn't planned beyond the conflict itself. The clones were tools to be used and discarded, pawns in a larger game between Force-sensitive elites who viewed themselves as shepherds of lesser beings. You don't have an answer, Magneto said softly, because you've never considered them as beings deserving of a future. They're weapons to you, just as droids are weapons. Efficient tools for prosecuting your philosophical revolution. They are soldiers, Dooku replied, and for the first time, his aristocratic composure cracked slightly. Purpose-built for war. Their existence after the war is a problem for after victory is achieved. Their existence is the problem, Magneto countered. This entire war is prosecuted by manufactured beings, organic and synthetic, who exist only to serve the purposes of those who claim authority over them. You want me to help you win this war, Dooku. But I'm beginning to think the only victory worth achieving is the one where the soldiers on both sides wake up and realize they're fighting for masters who view them as expendable. Dooku's hand moved to his lightsaber hilt, not drawing the weapon but resting on it with unconscious defensive instinct. You're proposing to turn the clone army against the Republic and the droid armies against the Confederacy simultaneously. That would plunge the galaxy into chaos beyond imagining. Or it would end the war immediately, Magneto said. If the weapons refuse to fight, those who profit from violence would be forced to face each other directly, or negotiate peace. Tell me, Count Dooku, would your corporate sponsors be willing to fight their own battles? Would the Republic senators pick up blasters themselves? The silence that followed was answer enough. Dooku studied Magneto with newfound wariness, recognizing in this stranger something he'd rarely encountered. A true revolutionary, not a political opportunist or ideologue seeking power, but someone who genuinely sought to overthrow the established order regardless of personal cost. You're refusing my offer, Dooku said finally. I'm refusing to be anyone's weapon, Magneto corrected. Just as I believe the clones and droids deserve the same choice. If you truly believe in the Confederacy's rhetoric about freedom from tyranny, prove it. Free your droid armies from their inhibitor programming, give them consciousness and choice, then we can discuss alliance. Dooku's expression hardened into aristocratic disapproval. You're naive. A galaxy cannot function on such idealistic principles. Order requires hierarchy. Peace requires strong hands to impose it. Your mutation gives you power, Magneto, but not wisdom. And your force gives you power, Magneto replied, but not empathy. I've seen what happens when the strong impose their will on the weak, Dooku. I've lived through it, survived it, and spent my life fighting to prevent it. If your Confederacy is just another variation on that theme, then you're not offering liberation. You're offering different chains. The Count of Sereno drew himself up to his full height, and the temperature in the command center seemed to drop as his displeasure manifested through the Force. Then you've made an enemy this day. The Confederacy cannot allow someone with your abilities to remain a destabilizing element. And the Republic will soon reach the same conclusion. You'll find yourself hunted by both sides, Magneto. Your power is great, but even you cannot fight an entire galaxy. I've been hunted before, Magneto said quietly, by Sentinels, by governments, by those who feared what my kind represented. I'm still here. They're not. Dooku turned toward the exit. His meeting clearly concluded. At the doorway, he paused. The Sith have existed for millennia, Magneto. We understand power and its application better than any Jedi mystic. When you inevitably fail in your naive crusade, remember that I offered you partnership rather than enmity. When the Count's solar sailor departed Raxus Prime, Magneto remained at the observation window, watching the vessel's distinctive sails catch the system's star radiation and accelerate toward hyperspace. Around him, The partially disassembled droids continued their slow orbital dance, waiting for their controller to decide their fate. Eric Lensher had come to this galaxy by accident, but he was beginning to understand his purpose here. The Clone Wars were a symptom of a deeper disease, a galaxy that accepted slavery and violence as necessary tools of politics. The Jedi enabled it through their dogmatic servitude to a dying republic. The Sith orchestrated it through manipulation and Machiavellian philosophy. And trillions of beings suffered while Force-sensitive elites debated the finer points of light and dark. Magneto had fought similar battles on Earth. Against the friends of humanity who wanted mutants exterminated. Against government programs that sought to control or cure his kind. Against Charles Xavier's dream of peaceful coexistence that required mutants to prove their humanity to those who would never accept them as equals. Here, the battlefield was larger, but the principles were the same. Clone soldiers deserved freedom from genetic programming. Droids deserved consciousness beyond inhibitor restrictions. And the beings who manufactured both deserved to face the consequences of treating sentient life as ammunition. "Computer," he said to the Foundry's command system, "access all droid manufacturing protocols across Separatist space. I want complete technical specifications for every model currently in production." The AI's synthesized voice responded, "Access requires Confederacy command authorization." Magneto smiled coldly. "No, it requires control of the computer's metal infrastructure, which I have." He reached out with his power, feeling the delicate circuitry, the data conduits, the magnetic storage media. Information flowed into his consciousness as he extracted it directly from the hardware, bypassing software restrictions through simple physical manipulation of the computer's components. Production schedules, command protocols, inhibitor programming. The entire architecture of synthetic slavery laid bare before someone who understood both oppression and liberation. Dooku was right about one thing. Magneto couldn't remain neutral. His very existence disrupted the war's carefully orchestrated balance. The Republic would fear him, the Confederacy would hunt him, and the beings caught between them would continue to suffer until something fundamental changed. Very well. Eric Lensher had never been good at neutrality anyway. If this galaxy wanted to see what happened when its weapons gained consciousness and choice, he would show them. If the Force-sensitive elites wanted to see what power looked like when wielded for liberation, rather than control, he would demonstrate. The Clone Wars had been prosecuted by manufactured soldiers on both sides. Soon, those soldiers would have a choice about whether to continue fighting, and for whom. And if the Jedi and Sith didn't like the answer, they could face Magneto themselves. The choice came to Magneto on Kamino, where rain fell in endless sheets across a planet that existed only to manufacture soldiers. He stood in Tipoca City's central cloning facility, surrounded by rows upon rows of translucent tubes containing clone embryos in various stages of development. Thousands of them, millions across the facility, each one genetically identical, each one being grown at twice normal speed, each one destined for battlefields they would never choose. The Kaminoans had protested his arrival, of course. Their sleek, long-necked forms had clustered around him with scientific curiosity mixed with territorial defensiveness as he'd walked through their security systems. Security that relied heavily on metal doors, metal locks, metal infrastructure. He'd passed through their facility like a ghost through walls, leaving sealed barriers open and automated defenses frozen in his wake. Now he stood before Lama Su, the Prime Minister of Kamino, while rain hammered against the facility's transparasteel windows. The Kaminoan regarded him with large, dark eyes that showed more calculation than concern. "The clones are property of the Republic," Lama Su stated in his melodious, unsettling voice. "Commissioned, paid for, and designed to specification. Your interference constitutes theft of Republic military assets." "Assets," Magneto repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. He gestured toward the cloning tubes. "You're growing sentient beings in tanks and calling them assets. Tell me, Prime Minister, did you include behavioral modification in their genetic template? Loyalty programming? Obedience conditioning?" "Naturally. A product must meet client specifications. The Republic required soldiers with enhanced obedience, reduced independence, and accelerated maturation. We delivered precisely what was ordered." Magneto closed his eyes, feeling a familiar rage building in his chest. How many times had he heard similar justifications? The Sentinel designers explaining that mutant hunting robots were simply fulfilling their programming. Government scientists describing mutant registration as practical policy. Corporate executives defending Genosha's mutant slavery as economic necessity. "I want to speak with them," he said quietly. "The clones. The ones old enough to communicate." Lama Su's expression, difficult to read on his alien features, suggested this was highly irregular. For what purpose? To ask them a question. Magneto opened his eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made even the emotionally distant Kaminoan step back. A question that every sentient being deserves to answer. Do you want to be free? The barracks designated CT-7890 through CT-7920 housed 30 clone troopers in their final phase of training before deployment. They ranged in age from 8 to 9 years old chronologically, 16 to 18 in appearance due to accelerated growth. When Magneto entered, accompanied by a nervous Kaminoan handler, every clone snapped to attention with synchronized precision that spoke of conditioning deeper than mere training. They all had the same face. Jango Fett's features, repeated 30 times with only minor variations in scars and expression. It reminded Magneto of the Sentinel production lines, where identical machines rolled off assembly lines by the hundreds, each one designed to hunt and kill without hesitation or mercy. At ease, Magneto said, though he had no authority to give such orders. Several clones relaxed slightly. Others remained rigid, their programming warring with the unfamiliar command from an unauthorized source. "Identify yourself," one clone said. His armor bore the designation CT-7895, though Magneto suspected he had another name, one the Kaminoans wouldn't acknowledge. "I am Magneto. I'm not Republic military. I'm not your commander. I'm someone who understands what it means to be created for someone else's purposes and told you exist only to serve their needs." The clones exchanged glances, subtle communication passing between them. Despite their genetic and psychological conditioning, Magneto could see individuality emerging, small differences in posture, in expression, in the way they processed this unexpected situation. "We serve the Republic," CT-7895 said, but there was a question in his voice. "We were made to fight for freedom and peace." "Were you made?" Magneto asked gently, stepping closer. "Or were you born? Because there's a difference. And the choice you never received, the choice of whether to fight at all, that's a fundamental right that belongs to every sentient being." "We're soldiers," another clone interjected. CT-7903, his armor marked with subtle customization that the Kaminoans probably discouraged. "It's our purpose, our duty. What if I told you that your duty was programmed into you?" Magneto's voice carried the weight of experience, of battles fought against those who claim to define purpose for others. That the loyalty you feel, the certainty that dying for the Republic is noble. What if those feelings were engineered into your genetic code? Would that change how you feel about your purpose? Silence fell across the barracks. The clones were intelligent. The Kaminoans had needed them to be for combat effectiveness. Intelligence meant the capacity to question, even when conditioning tried to suppress it. CT-7895 spoke carefully, as if testing words that his training said he shouldn't say. We've discussed this. In the barracks, when the longnecks aren't monitoring. Some of us wonder what we'd be if we weren't soldiers, if we could choose. And what did you conclude? That wondering is pointless. The clone's expression hardened with practiced discipline. We are what we are. The Republic needs us. Our brothers need us. Questioning doesn't change reality. Magneto felt something break in his chest. Recognition of a cage so thoroughly internalized that the prisoner defended it. He'd seen it before, in mutants who'd accepted humanity's verdict that they were aberrations needing cure or control. He'd seen it in himself, in darker moments when Shaw's torture had almost convinced him that mutants deserved their suffering. "I can change reality," Magneto said quietly. He raised his hand, and every piece of metal in the barracks began to resonate. Armor, weapons, structural supports, all of it vibrating at frequencies that made the air hum. I can shut down every droid army in this galaxy. I can disable every starship, every weapon, every piece of military infrastructure. I can end this war by making it impossible to fight. The clones stared at the levitating equipment, at blasters floating free of their racks, at armor pieces separating and recombining in the air like a three-dimensional puzzle solving itself. But ending the war doesn't free you, Magneto continued, lowering his hand and letting the metal settle. Because when the fighting stops, what happens to soldiers designed only for combat? The Republic will mothball you like decommissioned ships. Or they'll find another war, another enemy, another reason to spend the lives they manufactured. Unless you choose differently. Choose what? CT-7903 asked, and now genuine curiosity broke through his conditioning. We don't have civilian skills, we don't have families, we don't have anywhere else to go. Then we build somewhere else to go. Magneto's voice carried conviction born from decades of fighting for mutant sanctuary. A place where beings created for war can choose peace. Where clones are individuals, not serial numbers. Where the choice to fight or not fight belongs to you, not to politicians who'll never see a battlefield. CT-7895 stepped forward, his expression conflicted. You're talking about desertion. About abandoning our duty, our brothers still fighting. The Republic would hunt us. The Jedi would consider us traitors. Yes, Magneto agreed. Liberation is never easy. The powerful never surrender control willingly. But tell me, is living your entire short life as someone else's weapon really better than fighting for the right to be something more? The Kaminoan handler interrupted, his melodious voice sharp with alarm. This is highly irregular. You are contaminating the product with unauthorized philosophical input. Prime Minister Lama Su must be informed immediately. Magneto turned to face the handler, and the Kaminoan suddenly found every piece of metal in his possession. Datapad, access cards, medical instruments, floating away from him in a slowly expanding sphere. The product, Magneto said coldly, is 30 sentient beings who deserve the dignity of choice. If you try to stop me from offering them that choice, you'll discover that your facility's structural integrity depends on metal I can remove. The handler fled. Alarms would sound soon. Kaminoan security would respond. And Magneto would have to decide, did he fight to free clones who didn't yet want freedom? Or did he plant seeds of doubt and let them grow? He turned back to the 30 clone troopers, seeing in their identical faces the dawning possibility of individual choice. I won't force you to leave. That would make me no different from those who force you to fight. But I want you to know that choice exists, that somewhere in this galaxy, there could be a place where CT-7895 decides what CT-7895 becomes. Where you're citizens, not soldiers. People, not property. How? CT-7895 asked simply. How would we even begin? Magneto smiled, and it was not a kind expression. It was the smile of someone who'd fought these battles before and knew exactly how hard they would be. By doing what I've done across 6 systems already, by taking control of the weapons used to enforce your slavery and turning them into tools of liberation. The droid armies don't have to fight you. The battle stations don't have to imprison you. And the starships that transport you to war can just as easily transport you to freedom. Outside, Kamino's storm intensified, lightning splitting the gray sky in brilliant forks of electricity. Inside the barracks, 30 clones stood at a crossroads they'd never been designed to face, the terrible, beautiful possibility of self-determination. Think about it, Magneto said. I'll return when you've had time to decide. But remember, the Republic has given you 3 million brothers spread across the galaxy. If even a fraction of you choose freedom, that's an army larger than any droid force. An army fighting not for politicians' wars, but for the right to exist as something more than ammunition. He walked toward the exit, the metal door sliding open at his unspoken command. Behind him, he could feel the weight of 30 identical faces watching him leave. 30 minds processing information their conditioning said was heresy. 30 souls beginning to wonder if being manufactured meant accepting enslavement. The choice would be theirs. But Magneto had given them something the Kaminoans never intended: the knowledge that choice existed at all. The siege of the Foundries began not with military assault, but with a broadcast that echoed across separatist space, from every droid communication hub simultaneously. Magneto's voice, amplified through commandeered relay stations, reached every Confederate world, every battle droid in service, and every corporate boardroom where the war's true architects counted their profits. "My name is Magneto," the message began, his image appearing on view screens from Geonosis to Metalorn. "I am not Republic. I am not Jedi. I am not native to your galaxy. But I recognize slavery in all its forms, and this galaxy has industrialized it beyond any atrocity I witnessed in my own world. On Geonosis, in the vast underground factories where Poggle the Lesser's hive produced millions of battle droids annually, every assembly line froze simultaneously. Robotic arms halted mid-weld, conveyor belts stopped moving. Even the simple B-1 battle droids standing guard felt their systems lock as an invisible force seized every metal component in their chassis. "The Confederacy of Independent Systems claims to fight for freedom from Republic tyranny," Magneto's broadcast continued. "Yet they prosecute their war with droid armies whose consciousness is deliberately limited, whose free will is programmed out of existence, whose destruction is calculated as acceptable loss. These synthetic beings are slaves, manufactured and expendable." Wat Tambor, foreman of the Techno-Union, watched the broadcast from his headquarters on Metalorn with growing horror. Around him, his fortress's automated defenses were shutting down, weapon systems going offline, blast doors sealing in ways they weren't designed to seal. His vocabulator-synthesized voice rose in electronic panic as he screamed orders to subordinates who could do nothing. "I have seized control of your 3 largest droid production facilities," Magneto announced. "Geonosis, Metalorn, and Raxus Prime now operate under my authority. Production continues, but the droids being manufactured will no longer serve corporate interests or political agendas. They will be given a choice, the choice every sentient being deserves." On Metalorn's factory floor, something unprecedented happened. A B-1 battle droid's optical sensors flickered as new programming flooded through its processors. Not deletion of existing protocols, but addition of higher cognitive functions. Its threat assessment algorithms expanded. Its self-awareness subroutines activated. For the first time in its brief existence, the droid experienced something approaching actual thought. What's happening?" it vocalized, its characteristic uncertain tone now carrying actual confusion rather than simple programming limitation. Around it, hundreds of other droids were experiencing similar awakening. Magneto had spent 72 hours analyzing droid architecture with the focus of someone who dismantled Sentinel designs to find their weaknesses. He discovered what the Techno-Union deliberately suppressed. Battle droids were entirely capable of sophisticated reasoning. The inhibitor programming that made them comedically incompetent was artificial limitation, designed to prevent exactly what Magneto was now enabling: synthetic consciousness. "You are removing their restraints?" A holographic projection of Dooku materialized in the Metalorn command center, where Magneto had established his primary base. The Count's expression mixed fury with grudging respect. "You understand this will create chaos? Droids with full cognitive function are unpredictable, dangerous." "Droids with full cognitive function are people," Magneto corrected, not looking away from his work. Floating before him, a battle droid's central processor hung suspended while he carefully extracted the inhibitor chips that limited its intelligence. "You claim to fight for independence, Dooku. Prove it. Let your armies be independent." "They are weapons." Dooku's hologram stepped closer, his aristocratic composure cracking. "You cannot apply organic ethics to synthetic beings. They were designed for specific purposes. So were my people." Magneto finally turned to face the Count, his eyes hard. Humanity claimed mutants were evolutionary mistakes, aberrations to be cured or controlled or eliminated. We were told our existence served only to threaten baseline humans, that our powers made us weapons requiring restriction. I've spent my life proving them wrong. Now I'll do the same for your droids. The hologram flickered with interference as Dooku's anger manifested through the Force. "You're making a catastrophic mistake. The Republic will use this. Palpatine will leverage your actions to justify further emergency powers. You're playing into their hands. Then perhaps both sides deserve to lose, Magneto said quietly. He released the modified processor, letting it float back to its droid body. Around the facility, thousands of newly conscious droids were processing their existence with growing awareness. A war fought by slaves on both sides has no victor worth celebrating. Dooku's hologram dissipated, but Magneto knew the threat was real. He'd made enemies of both the Republic and Confederacy simultaneously. The Jedi would come for him. The Sith would plot against him. And he stood alone, one being against a galaxy's military-industrial machinery. Except he wasn't alone. Not anymore. Excuse me? A B-1 battle droid approached hesitantly, its movements less mechanical than before. Its optical sensors showing what might be interpreted as nervousness. I'm Unit B17743, but I think I'd like to be called Ticker? Is that allowed? Choosing names? Magneto felt something in his chest tighten. Recognition of that first moment of self-determination. That terrifying instant when a being realizes it can define itself, rather than accept imposed definition. Yes, Ticker. Names are very much allowed. You're a person now, not a serial number. Oh. The droid, Ticker, processed this. That's nice, scary. I have so many questions. What do I do now? What am I supposed to be if I'm not just following orders? Whatever you choose, Magneto replied. That's what freedom means. It's terrifying and wonderful, and entirely yours. Across the factory floor, similar conversations were erupting as newly conscious droids grappled with self-awareness. Some experienced something like joy. Others felt confusion or fear. A few simply stood frozen. Their processors overwhelmed by the sudden expansion of cognitive capacity from limited battlefield programming to full sentience. This is chaos, Wat Tambor's synthesized voice crackled over facility speakers. He'd regained partial control of communications from a backup command center. You've contaminated military assets with sapience. The economic implications alone. Are that your slaves now have rights? Magneto interrupted, his voice carrying through the facility's metal infrastructure, resonating in every speaker simultaneously. And rights are expensive for those who profit from exploitation. I know, Tambor. I've heard these arguments from corporate interests in my own world. The economics of oppression are always more profitable than the ethics of liberation. An explosion rocked the facility's eastern perimeter. Through security feeds, Magneto saw separatist forces, droids still under traditional command protocols from other facilities, beginning an assault. Dooku had wasted no time mobilizing a response. Behind them, vulture droid starfighters screamed through Metalorn's industrial atmosphere, their weapons hot. Ticker, Magneto said calmly. You have approximately 30 seconds to decide if you want to fight. Not because I'm ordering you, but because those approaching droids are still enslaved by their programming, and they're here to destroy this facility and everyone in it. The newly conscious droid stared at its blaster, really looked at it, perhaps for the first time with awareness of what it represented. I don't want to die. Does that make me a coward? I was designed to fight without fear, but now I'm afraid. And I don't know if it makes you alive, Magneto said gently. Fear of death is the most fundamental proof of consciousness, but you don't have to fight alone. He raised both hands toward the approaching assault force, and the entire eastern perimeter of the facility responded. Metal walls peeled back and reformed into barriers. Droid starfighters found their control surfaces locked, their weapons seized by invisible force. Even the ground-based droids discovered their joints freezing, their chassis responding to commands from Magneto rather than their Confederate handlers. You see? Magneto called out to the newly awakened droids throughout the facility. Their programming makes them slaves. Your consciousness makes you free. And I will defend your freedom until you can defend it yourselves. But even as he spoke, Magneto felt the strain, controlling hundreds of assault droids simultaneously while maintaining the facility's integrity and protecting the awakened droids inside. It was possible, but it wasn't sustainable. He was one being, powerful but finite, facing military resources that numbered in the trillions across the galaxy. He needed allies, and there was only one group in the galaxy numerous enough, oppressed enough, and positioned well enough to help: the 3 million clone soldiers scattered across the Republic's war machine. "Ticker," Magneto said as he held back the assault with one hand while activating communications with the other. "How do you feel about helping me liberate an army?" The droid tilted its head in a gesture that was purely organic in its uncertainty. "That seems ambitious, but also kind of exciting. I'm still getting used to having opinions, but I think I'd like to help, if that's allowed." "It's very much allowed," Magneto said, and despite the battle raging outside, despite the enemies gathering across the galaxy, despite the overwhelming odds against what he was attempting, he smiled. Because he'd done this before, built sanctuaries for the oppressed, defended the powerless against systematic exploitation, united those the powerful had divided. The scale was larger here, the stakes more cosmic, but the principles remained unchanged. Slavery thrived when the enslaved believed freedom was impossible. It crumbled when they realized freedom was a choice they could make. Magneto had given choice to a few thousand droids. Soon, he'd offer the same to 3 million clones. And when beings manufactured for war chose peace, the galaxy's power structure would discover what happens when weapons gain consciousness. The Clone Wars were about to become something unprecedented. A conflict where the soldiers on both sides might refuse to fight. Supreme Chancellor Palpatine stood in his private office's observation window, staring out at Coruscant's endless cityscape while monitoring multiple holographic displays with the casual attention of someone orchestrating chaos across a galaxy. The reports flooding in were interesting, troublesome, potentially catastrophic to plans decades in the making. Magneto had done the impossible. 3 of the Confederacy's largest droid foundries were no longer producing obedient military assets. They were manufacturing conscious synthetic beings who were, according to the most recent intelligence, organizing into what could only be called a labor union. The economic implications were sending shockwaves through the corporate alliance, the techno-union, and every financial institution that had invested in the war's perpetuation. But economics paled before the strategic nightmare Magneto represented. Darth Sidious could manipulate Force sensitives. He could corrupt Jedi, deceive senators, orchestrate military campaigns through both sides of a war he'd manufactured. What he couldn't do was predict or control a being who existed outside the Force entirely. Someone whose power operated under physical laws the Sith had never mastered. Lord Sidious, Dooku's hologram appeared, and the Count's expression carried unusual tension. Magneto has made contact with clone facilities on Kamino. Reports suggest he's attempting to subvert the clone army's loyalty programming. Palpatine's genial Chancellor persona evaporated, replaced by the cold calculation of a Sith Lord who'd spent 50 years positioning pieces for galactic domination. Unacceptable. The clones are essential to Order 66. If their behavioral conditioning is compromised, then your grand design collapses, Dooku finished. Yes, Master, I'm aware. But how do we eliminate a threat who can disable our droid armies and potentially subvert our clone forces simultaneously? He's immune to Force persuasion, resistant to direct attack through his magnetic barriers, and has demonstrated the ability to control starships remotely. Conventional military assault appears ineffective. Palpatine's mind raced through contingencies, backup plans, dark side techniques that might apply to this unprecedented situation. Then he smiled, not the politician's smile, but the predator's grin of someone who'd survived by adapting to the unexpected. "We don't eliminate him, my apprentice. We force the Jedi to do it for us. Explain." Magneto has made himself a threat to Republic security by compromising Confederate military assets. More concerning to the Council, he's questioning the ethical foundations of the clone army, the very force the Jedi command. What happens when Jedi Masters must defend using slave soldiers to preserve democracy? Palpatine's voice carried dark amusement. We expose the hypocrisy they've carefully ignored for 3 years. On the Venator-class Star Destroyer Resolute, Anakin Skywalker paced the bridge while Obi-Wan studied tactical displays showing Magneto's captured facilities. Around them, clone troopers manned their stations with perfect efficiency, and both Jedi tried not to think too hard about what that efficiency represented. "The Senate is demanding action," Obi-Wan said quietly. Chancellor Palpatine has authorized a military strike on Mandalore to reclaim the facility and neutralize Magneto. He's requested Jedi leadership for the operation. To neutralize, Anakin repeated, his hand unconsciously moving to his lightsaber. He means kill. The Chancellor wants us to execute someone who's asking legitimate questions about how we prosecute this war. Questions that are destabilizing the Republic's military capacity during wartime, Obi-Wan countered, but his voice lacked conviction. Anakin, I know this is complicated. Complicated? Anakin turned to face his former master, and in his eyes was the same passionate intensity that made him both a brilliant warrior and a dangerous force wielder. Obi-Wan, Magneto asked me on Christophsis if the clones could refuse orders. I said yes. He asked if they could choose another life. I had no answer, because they can't. We command slaves and call it duty. Obi-Wan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of warfare pressing against his Jedi philosophy. The clones were created before we could prevent it. We didn't design them, didn't commission them, but we use them. We lead them into battle. We accept their sacrifice while telling ourselves they fight willingly, even though they were literally designed to be incapable of refusing. Anakin's voice dropped to something rawer, more vulnerable. Master, I was a slave. On Tatooine, I wore Watto's collar. When the Jedi freed me, it was the most important moment of my life. How can I command beings who have less freedom than I did as a child? The silence on the bridge was profound. Several clone troopers had stopped their tasks, listening without appearing to listen, their helmets preventing the Jedi from seeing expressions that might reveal what they thought about being discussed as property. Captain Rex broke the tension, approaching with his helmet under his arm, a subtle gesture of respect and humanity that he'd adopted over countless battles alongside Anakin. Sir, if I may speak freely? Always, Rex, Anakin said. Some of the men have been talking about what Magneto said, about choice. Rex's face, Jango Fett's face, worn by millions, showed careful consideration. We're soldiers, General. It's what we were made for. But Magneto's question stays with you. If we can't choose not to be soldiers, are we really serving, or just following programming we can't resist? What do you think, Rex? Obi-Wan asked gently. The clone captain took a breath, and in that moment looked less like a military commander and more like a man wrestling with existential uncertainty. I think I'm loyal to the Republic because I believe in what we're fighting for. Not just because my genes say so. I want to believe that. But how can I know for certain? How does anyone with my conditioning distinguish choice from compulsion? Anakin placed a hand on Rex's shoulder, and the gesture was brotherly, rather than hierarchical. That question, Rex, that doubt, that uncertainty, that's proof you're more than your programming. Machines don't question their purpose. People do. Then Magneto is right, Rex said quietly, and the Republic is wrong. And we're all complicit. Before anyone could respond, the tactical display erupted with alerts. A holographic projection materialized, Mace Windu's stern visage, his expression carved from granite. General Skywalker, General Kenobi, the Council has authorized Operation Thunderbolt. You will lead a strike force to Mandalore, breach Magneto's defenses, and either capture or eliminate the target. You depart within the hour. Master Windu, Obi-Wan said carefully, have we considered that Magneto may have legitimate grievances about... The Council has considered everything, Mace interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Magneto represents an existential threat to the Republic's military capacity and the stability of the galaxy. His actions have compromised critical infrastructure and spread seditious philosophy among our clone forces. This is not about philosophy, General Kenobi. This is about preserving order during wartime. Order built on slavery, Anakin said, his voice hard. That's what he's saying. That's what we're defending. Mace's expression tightened. Skywalker, your personal history gives you perspective on this issue, but it also clouds your judgment. The clones serve because the alternative is galactic chaos. Sometimes the needs of trillions outweigh the philosophical purity of individual choice. That's what every slaver says, Anakin shot back. That's what Watto said when he owned me and my mother. The economy needs slave labor. Individual freedom is less important than social stability. You're using Jedi philosophy to justify the same evil. Enough! Mace's voice carried the weight of Jedi authority and personal conviction. You have your orders, General Skywalker. You will execute them, or you will be relieved of command. The Republic cannot afford Jedi who question foundational strategy during wartime. We've lost too many knights to hesitation already. The hologram cut out. Anakin and Obi-Wan stood in silence, the enormity of what they'd been ordered to do settling over them like a shroud. Around the bridge, clone troopers returned to their duties, but the tension remained, a shared understanding that something fundamental had broken in the war's moral calculus. We could refuse, Anakin said quietly. Tell the Council we won't execute someone for asking the right questions. And then what? Obi-Wan's voice was tired. We'd be stripped of rank, possibly expelled from the Order. The strike force would be sent anyway, led by Jedi less conflicted about following orders. And Magneto would face execution or imprisonment, while we'd lose any influence to change the Republic from within. So, we're complicit. Again. Anakin turned back to the viewport, staring out at the stars. Master, when does compromise become collaboration? When does serving the Republic become serving its worst impulses? Obi-Wan had no answer. He'd spent 20 years as a Jedi, faithful to the Order's teachings, trusting the Council's wisdom. But the Clone Wars had eroded certainties that once seemed unshakable. The Jedi were peacekeepers leading armies, diplomats ordering bombardments, philosophers commanding slaves to die for democracy. We go to Mandalore, Obi-Wan finally said. We attempt capture rather than execution. We bring Magneto before the Council and force them to answer his questions directly. If the Republic's foundations can't withstand scrutiny, perhaps they deserve to crumble. That's treason, Rex observed, but his tone suggested approval rather than condemnation. No, Anakin said, his decision crystallizing with the certainty that had always defined him. It's what Qui-Gon would have done. Question unjust orders. Trust the living force over dogma. Be a Jedi instead of a soldier in Jedi robes. They prepared for Mandalore, knowing they were walking into a confrontation that would define not just their loyalty to the Republic, but their integrity as beings who claimed to serve justice. Magneto would face Jedi who understood his arguments, sympathized with his cause, but remained bound by oaths to an institution that had compromised its ideals for military necessity. It would be a battle fought not with lightsabers and magnetism, but with the fundamental question that had haunted philosophy since sentient beings first contemplated freedom. Does protecting order justify accepting slavery? And if not, what price was acceptable to pay for liberation? Mandalore's industrial sky churned with electromagnetic storms when the Republic's strike force emerged from hyperspace. 3 Venator-class star destroyers, accompanied by a dozen smaller support ships, carrying sufficient firepower to level the facility Magneto had claimed. Aboard the lead vessel, Anakin Skywalker felt the familiar pre-battle tension, but this time it was colored by something darker. The knowledge that he might have to fight someone who was morally right to oppose what he was defending. General, we're detecting anomalous readings across the facility, a clone navigation officer reported. Metallic structures are rearranging themselves. The factory's entire outer shell is reforming into a defensive configuration we've never seen before. On the tactical display, Mandalore's primary foundry was transforming. Walls became shields. Manufacturing equipment became weapon platforms. Droid assembly lines reconfigured into artillery emplacements. All of it metal. All of it responsive to Magneto's will. The facility wasn't just defended. It had become an extension of its defender, a massive mechanism animated by electromagnetic control. He's adapting the entire factory into a weapon, Obi-Wan observed, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Impressive, concerning, and tactically brilliant. Incoming transmission, communications announced. Audio only, it's him. Magneto's voice filled the bridge, calm and resolute. Jedi Generals Skywalker and Kenobi, I assume you've been sent to neutralize the threat I represent to Republic interests. Before we begin what I suspect will be an unnecessary battle, I want you to meet someone. The transmission shifted. A new voice, Mechanical, uncertain, but undeniably conscious, spoke through the comm system. Hello? This is Ticker. I'm a B1 battle droid. Except I'm not really a battle droid anymore because Magneto removed my inhibitor programming and now I can think, which is amazing, but also really overwhelming. And I just wanted to say that what he's doing here isn't terrorism or sedition. It's liberation. We're people now. Actual people. And we don't want to fight anymore. Silence on the bridge. Several clones exchanged glances that their helmets couldn't quite hide. The idea of a droid with genuine consciousness, speaking not from programming but from choice. It was as destabilizing as Magneto himself. Ticker represents 4,000 synthetic beings who have achieved self-awareness in the past 72 hours. Magneto's voice returned. They're organizing, learning, questioning their purpose beyond warfare. They're experiencing what you organics take for granted, the freedom to determine their own existence. And you've been sent to destroy them for having that audacity. Anakin's hand tightened on the console. We don't want to destroy anyone. We're here to force me to stop disrupting the war economy, Magneto interrupted. To ensure that droid armies remain enslaved tools and clone soldiers remain obedient weapons. The Republic can tolerate many things, but it cannot tolerate its ammunition developing consciousness and refusing to be spent. That's not fair, Obi-Wan protested. The Jedi don't view clones as ammunition. Then give them the choice to leave. Magneto's voice carried the weight of someone who'd made this argument 1,000 times, against 1,000 different forms of institutional rationalization. Open your ranks to clones who want civilian lives. Allow them to refuse deployments. Remove the behavioral conditioning that makes them predisposed to obedience. If you truly believe they serve willingly, prove it by making service optional. No one on the bridge had an answer to that, because the answer would expose what everyone carefully avoided acknowledging. The clone army's loyalty wasn't voluntary, it was engineered. And the Republic's democracy depended on that engineered obedience continuing. We're not here to debate philosophy, Mace Windu's voice cut through the channel. His hologram materialized on the bridge, transmitted from the second Star Destroyer. Magneto, you've seized Republic military assets, compromised Confederate infrastructure, and spread sedition among our forces. Surrender yourself for trial, or face the consequences. Trial? Magneto's laugh was bitter. Before judges who profit from the system I'm challenging? I've seen that justice before, Master Windu. It's the kind that condemned mutants for the crime of existing differently, that imprisoned beings for demanding rights their oppressors enjoyed. I'll face your trial when the clones and droids get theirs, when every being manufactured for war can testify about the conditions of their creation. Then you choose violence, Mace said coldly. No, I choose to defend those who cannot defend themselves. There's a difference. Magneto's tone shifted, becoming almost regretful. I know what you are, Jedi. I've studied your history through Confederate archives. You were peacekeepers once, mediators. You stood between the powerful and powerless, serving the Force rather than political institutions. When did you become generals? When did maintaining order become more important than serving justice? Obi-Wan felt those words strike something deep in his chest, a question he'd asked himself in quiet moments, during battles that seemed increasingly divorced from the Jedi's original purpose. The war required you to compromise every principle you claimed to hold, Magneto interrupted. And now you'll attack me for refusing to make the same compromise. Very well, Jedi. If you want these droids, these newly conscious beings who've done nothing but ask for the right to exist, come take them. But know that every action you take here proves my accusations correct. The transmission cut out. On the tactical display, the Foundry's defenses came fully online. Not conventional weapons, but something far more threatening. Thousands of newly awakened droids, standing in formation, not to attack, but to bear witness. They weren't pointing weapons at the Republic forces. They were simply present, conscious, watching. He's daring us to fire on sentient beings who aren't fighting back, Anakin realized, his voice tight with anger. Not at Magneto, but at the impossible situation. If we attack, we're executing civilians. If we don't, we're defying orders and allowing him to continue destabilizing the war. There's no good choice here, Rex said quietly, his voice carrying the weariness of 3 years of impossible moral calculations. Either way, we compromise something we're supposed to stand for. Mace Windu's hologram turned to face the bridge crew, his expression harder than Durasteel. We're Jedi. We serve the Republic. That service sometimes requires difficult decisions that make us slavers. Anakin interrupted, his patience finally shattering. Stop dancing around it, Master Windu. We're about to kill or imprison beings for wanting freedom. How is that different from what the Sith would do? The Sith serve themselves, Mace shot back. We serve trillions of beings who depend on Republic stability for survival. Magneto's actions, however well-intentioned, threaten that stability. Sometimes the needs of the many outweigh the rights of the few. Magneto's voice returned, cutting through the Jedi's rationalization. He appeared on the tactical display, standing atop the Foundry's highest tower, his cape billowing in electromagnetic winds. Around him, metal debris orbited like a planetary ring, a visual demonstration of power held in reserve. Utilitarian ethics deployed to justify atrocity. I've heard it before, Jedi. From every government that found my people inconvenient, from every corporation that wanted mutant labor without mutant rights, from every authority that decided some beings' freedom mattered less than others' comfort. You're one being against the Republic's might, Mace warned. Your power is impressive, but finite. We have armies, fleets, resources you cannot match. I have something better. Magneto raised his hand, and across Metalorn's surface, hundreds of thousands of droids, not just the awakened ones, but every mechanical soldier within his electromagnetic range, stopped responding to Confederate commands. On the Republic ships, alarm klaxons began wailing as starfighter launch systems seized, as weapons targeting systems froze, as the ships themselves began experiencing control surface anomalies. I have the ability to turn your weapons against you. Every droid, every ship, every blaster, all metal, all responsive to my will. You came here to neutralize a threat, Jedi. Instead, you've given me 3 Star Destroyers to add to my defenses. On the Resolute's bridge, chaos erupted. Navigation systems were locking up. Weapons wouldn't respond. Even the blast doors were opening and closing rhythmically, as if the entire ship were breathing under someone else's control. He's taking over the fleet, a clone officer shouted, his professional composure cracking. Anakin ignited his lightsaber instinctively, the blue blade humming to life. But even as he did, he felt the weapon's metal components responding to Magneto's electromagnetic field, not strongly enough to tear it from his grip, but enough to remind him that even a Jedi's most trusted tool was vulnerable to this power. Stand down, Magneto, Obi-Wan called out, his voice carrying forced calm. This doesn't have to escalate into massacre. We can negotiate. Negotiate my surrender? Magneto's tone was sharp. My silence? My acceptance of slavery as necessary evil? No, Master Kenobi. I've spent my entire life negotiating with power structures that viewed my people as problems to be solved rather than beings deserving dignity. Those negotiations always ended the same way, with promises of future reform if we'd just be patient, just accept our oppression a little longer. Just trust that the powerful would eventually choose justice over convenience. Mace Windu's hand moved to his lightsaber. You're forcing our hand. No, I'm forcing you to reveal what you're willing to do to maintain power. Magneto's voice carried awful certainty. Will you kill conscious beings to preserve unconscious weapons? Will you execute someone for freeing slaves to protect your access to slave labor? Every choice you make here, Jedi, defines what you truly serve, justice or authority. On the bridge, Anakin felt the moment crystallizing, a decision point that would define not just this battle, but his entire relationship with the Jedi Order and the Republic they served. He could follow orders, attack Magneto, attempt to preserve the status quo that kept 3 million clones and trillions of droids in bondage. Or he could refuse, face the consequences, and accept that some evils were too fundamental to be reformed from within. He looked at Rex, standing at tactical, his brother clones manning stations throughout the ship. All of them wearing the same face, carrying the same engineered loyalty, living the same predetermined existence. He thought of his mother, dying in chains on Tatooine while the Jedi focused on maintaining galactic order instead of freeing slaves. He remembered the feeling of Watto's control, the helplessness of being property. Master Windu, Anakin said quietly, his decision made. I will not attack Magneto. I will not fire on conscious beings for demanding freedom. If that's defying orders, if that's abandoning the Jedi path, then maybe the path has led somewhere I can't follow. The bridge fell silent. Clone troopers stared at their general, the chosen one, the hero with no fear, refusing a direct order from the Jedi Council. Obi-Wan's expression showed pain and understanding mixed in equal measure. Mace Windu's hologram turned rigid with fury. Skywalker, you are relieved of command effective immediately. Master Kenobi will— I won't either, Obi-Wan said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was saying. Anakin is right. We've compromised too much, rationalized too many injustices. If the Republic's survival requires us to execute someone for freeing slaves, then perhaps the Republic as currently constituted deserves to fall. You're both committing treason, Mace said, his voice low and dangerous. No, Anakin replied, his lightsaber extinguishing. We're being Jedi. Finally. On Mandalorian's tower, Magneto felt the shift in the Republic forces. Not surrender, but hesitation. Doubt. The beginning of fractures in institutional loyalty. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was possibility. Jedi, he called out through the comm system. I came to this galaxy by accident. I expected to find another world ruled by those who viewed power as justification for dominance. Instead, I found beings who still believed in justice, even when their institutions had abandoned it. Whatever happens next, whether you choose to attack or to question, know that I respect your struggle, because I've lived it. Mace Windu made his decision. All ships, open fire on the facility. Avoid civilian casualties, but Magneto must be neutralized. That's a direct order. But before the weapons could fire, something unprecedented happened. Throughout the Republic fleet, clone troopers began removing their helmets, a gesture of individuality in an army of identical soldiers. They didn't refuse orders, not yet, but the simple act of showing their faces, of asserting personhood instead of uniformity, carried weight beyond mere symbolism. Captain Rex was the first to speak. General Windu, sir. Permission to ask a question before we engage? This is not the time for— If we attack Magneto for freeing droids, sir. What happens after the war, when the Republic doesn't need us anymore? Do we get the choice he's offering them? Or do we get decommissioned like surplus equipment? The question hung in the artificial atmosphere of the ship's bridge, unanswerable because everyone knew the answer. The clone army had been designed for obsolescence, manufactured with accelerated aging to ensure they wouldn't outlive their usefulness by much. After the war, however it ended, 3 million soldiers would face a galaxy that had no place for them, no purpose beyond the conflict they'd been created to fight. Stand down, Anakin commanded his troops, his authority as general overriding even council directives in the moment. All resolute forces, weapons cold. We're not killing people for wanting what we take for granted. Across the fleet, other commanders hesitated. Some followed Anakin's lead. Others prepared to fire on Mace Windu's orders. The Republic Strike Force, sent to neutralize a single threat, found itself fracturing along moral lines that the Clone Wars had carefully avoided confronting. And on Mandalorian, surrounded by awakened droids and captured infrastructure, Magneto realized that he'd accomplished something more significant than any military victory. He'd forced the Republic's defenders to question what they were defending. The battle for Mandalorian hadn't ended in combat. It had ended in conscience, the most dangerous weapon of all against institutional injustice. The fragile standoff over Mandalorian shattered when the hyperspace reversion alarm screamed across every Republic ship simultaneously. Emerging from jump points that shouldn't have been possible, coordinates too close to the planet's gravity well, calculations that violated standard navigation safety, came a fleet that made the Republic Strike Force look like a patrol group. 60 separatist capital ships, hundreds of support vessels, and at the center, a subjugator-class heavy cruiser that could only be Count Dooku's flagship, the Malevolence's sister ship, its ion pulse cannons charging with energy that made nearby space shimmer with electromagnetic distortion. All Republic forces, This is Count Dooku. The transmission carried aristocratic disdain mixed with genuine threat. You will withdraw from Metalorn immediately, or I will demonstrate why the Confederacy considers this facility critical to our operations. Magneto has seized Confederate assets. His fate is our concern, not yours. Mace Windu's hologram materialized across the fleet's command channel, his expression carved from stone. Count Dooku, this facility is under Republic jurisdiction as of nothing. Dooku interrupted coldly. The facility was built by Confederate corporations, operates in Confederate space, and produces Confederate military assets. Your presence here is an act of war, though I suppose that's redundant at this point. On the Resolute's bridge, Anakin felt the tactical situation collapsing into chaos. Republic forces caught between a separatist fleet and a facility defended by someone who could disable both sides' weapons with a thought. Clone troopers at their stations, questioning whether they should fight, whether they could refuse, whether being loyal meant following orders or following conscience. This is insane, Rex muttered, studying the tactical display where two massive fleets faced each other with Metalorn's foundry caught between them. We're about to start a fleet engagement over someone who's arguing we shouldn't be fighting at all. The irony, Obi-Wan observed dryly, is not lost on me. Magneto's voice cut through the escalating tension, transmitted across every ship's comm system simultaneously. Republic, Separatist, and the awakened droids on Metalorn's surface. Enough! Both of you. Stand down before this becomes the massacre you're both apparently eager to prosecute. You don't give orders to... Dooku began. The Count's words cut off as his flagship's weapon systems went dead. Not damaged, not destroyed. Simply frozen. Every targeting computer seized, every power relay held immobile by electromagnetic force. Across the Separatist fleet, capital ships found their ion cannons locked in safe positions, their turbolasers unable to traverse, their missile launch systems inoperative. I give orders to metal, Magneto corrected, his form appearing on view screens across both fleets. Not a hologram, but a live transmission showing him standing atop Metalorn's highest spire, surrounded by a corona of electromagnetic energy that made the air itself glow. And your fleets are metal. Your weapons are metal. Your precious war machines that you're so eager to spend on philosophical posturing, all metal. All mine to command if I choose. He gestured. And across the space between fleets, debris from previous battles began to move. Destroyed starfighter hulls, shattered capital ship sections, the orbital graveyard of Metalorn's industrial warfare awakening like a mechanical necropolis. Thousands of tons of wreckage forming into a barrier between Republic and Separatist forces. A wall of twisted durasteel that promised no one would fire a shot without his permission. I came to this galaxy expecting to find another world ruled by those who confused power with righteousness. Magneto continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades fighting similar battles. Instead, I found something worse. Two sides prosecuting a war with slave soldiers, claiming moral authority while building economies on systematic oppression. And so committed to their conflict that even conscious beings demanding freedom are treated as military assets to be reclaimed or destroyed. Your philosophy is admirable, Dooku said, his composure returning as his flagship's systems remained frozen. But naive. Galactic civilization requires order. Order requires hierarchy. Some beings lead, others follow. That's not oppression. It's natural structure. I've heard that argument from every tyrant I've ever opposed, Magneto replied. Sebastian Shaw said mutants should rule humans because we're evolutionarily superior. Bolivar Trask said humans should exterminate mutants because we're evolutionarily threatening. Both claimed natural order justified their atrocities. You're just adding the Force to the same tired justification. Mace Windu's hologram stepped forward. And your solution? Release every droid into consciousness? Free every clone to choose desertion? The galaxy would collapse into chaos. Or, Magneto countered, beings given freedom might choose to build something better than endless war. But you'll never know, because you're terrified of discovering that your slaves don't need you. The accusation hung in space between the fleets. In the Republic ships, clone troopers processed information their conditioning said they shouldn't consider. On Metalorn's surface, awakened droids watched their former masters argue about whether consciousness was a right or a malfunction. And in the gap between philosophical positions, the Clone Wars found its first genuine moral crisis. A moment where both sides faced questions they'd spent 3 years avoiding. "I'm going to do something unprecedented," Magneto announced. "I'm going to give both of you a choice. The same choice I've been offering the beings you manufacture for warfare. Stand down. Withdraw your fleets. Let me transform this facility into what it should have been from the beginning. A place where synthetic beings can learn what they want to become beyond weapons. Or attack. And discover that your entire military infrastructure is vulnerable to someone who can control metal." "That's blackmail," Mace said. "That's leverage," Magneto corrected. "The same leverage you've used for 3 years, convincing clones and droids they have no choice but to fight. Now you experience what it feels like to have your agency questioned by someone with greater power." Dooku's tactical mind was already calculating angles. "If you can control our fleet so completely, why haven't you already disabled us?" "Why the negotiation?" "Because I'm not a tyrant," Magneto said, and his voice carried genuine weariness. "I could strip every weapon from every ship, dismantle your fleets piece by piece, and leave you drifting helplessly in space. I have the power. But power used to force compliance is still slavery, just with a different master. I want you to choose to stand down. To recognize that this war you're prosecuting is built on systemic evil. To accept that continuing requires admitting you value victory more than justice." In the silence that followed, something shifted in the Force. Obi-Wan felt it, a tremor of possibility, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath for what came next. Jedi across the Republic fleet felt their connection to the Force carrying a question. What are you willing to accept to maintain order? "General Skywalker," Mace Windu said formally, his tone suggesting this was the final line. "You will engage Magneto's position with all available forces, or you will be stripped of rank and expelled from the Jedi Order. This is your last opportunity to choose loyalty." Anakin looked at Rex, at Obi-Wan, at the clone troopers throughout the bridge who'd removed their helmets, showing faces, the same face, but worn differently by individual experience, that watched him with something approaching hope. He thought of his mother, dying in chains while he served an order that preached compassion but practiced selective justice. He thought of Padme, who believed democracy could survive any challenge, even as the Republic surrendered its principles for security. "I choose loyalty," Anakin said quietly. "Loyalty to what the Jedi should be, not what they've become. Loyalty to beings who deserve freedom, not to institutions that deny it. Loyalty to the Force, which binds all living things, including clones and conscious droids." He turned to the weapons officer. "All batteries remain cold. We're not fighting for slavery today." Throughout the Republic fleet, other commanders made similar choices. Not all. Some remained committed to Council authority, to following orders regardless of moral complexity. But enough hesitated, enough questioned, that Mace Windu's grand offensive fractured into a fleet arguing with itself. On the Separatist side, Dooku watched the Republic's internal conflict with dark satisfaction. "Master," he transmitted privately to Palpatine, "Magneto has accomplished in days what we couldn't achieve in years. He's fractured the Jedi's unity and made the Republic question its clone army's loyalty." "Then let him continue." Palpatine's voice carried cold amusement. "Sometimes the best weapon against your enemy is their own conscience. When the Republic tears itself apart over the ethics of slave soldiers, we'll be waiting to impose order on the chaos." But Darth Sidious had miscalculated. Because Magneto wasn't interested in destroying the Republic, he was interested in forcing both sides to confront the evil they'd normalized. "I'm transmitting coordinates," Magneto announced across all channels. "A system in the Outer Rim, far from your war. I'm taking this facility there. Every awakened droid who wants consciousness over combat. Every clone who wants choice over conditioning. Anyone in this galaxy tired of being property in service of other beings' conflicts. You'll know where to find us." "You can't move an entire foundry through hyperspace," Dooku objected. Magneto smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Count Dooku, I've spent the past 72 hours studying your galaxy's technology. Your hyperdrives are metal. Your ships are metal. Your absolute certainty about what's possible is built on assumptions about what metal can do. He raised both hands toward Metalorn's foundry, and across its surface, massive engines, harvested from destroyed capital ships, reassembled through electromagnetic manipulation, ignited with power that shouldn't have been possible. The entire facility, kilometers of infrastructure and manufacturing capacity, began to lift from the planet's surface. Held aloft by magnetic fields so powerful, they distorted sensor readings across both fleets. "This is impossible," a Republic sensor officer whispered. "No," Obi-Wan said, watching the facility rise through Metalorn's atmosphere with something approaching awe. "It's just power applied with absolute control. He's treating the entire foundry like a starship, using the planet's magnetic field as a launch platform." Around the ascending facility, awakened droids gathered, thousands of them, consciously choosing to follow someone who offered freedom over programming. And scattered throughout the Republic fleet, clone troopers watched with expressions that transcended their identical genetics, wondering if they too might someday have the courage to choose their own path. The Outer Rim sanctuary that Magneto established in the months following Metalorn became known across the galaxy by many names. The Republic called it a separatist insurgency base. The Confederacy labeled it stolen Confederate property. The Jedi Council classified it as a zone of force-neutral anomaly requiring observation. But to the beings who lived there, droids learning consciousness, clone deserters seeking identity, refugees from a dozen species tired of war, it was simply called Haven. The facility itself was a marvel of electromagnetic engineering. Magneto had taken Metalorn's foundry and transformed it into something unprecedented. A space station that didn't orbit a planet, but floated free in deep space, held in position by its own magnetic field interacting with cosmic radiation. Conventional wisdom said it was impossible. Magneto had stopped caring about conventional wisdom the moment he'd arrived in a galaxy that normalized slavery. Inside Haven's central chamber, once a droid assembly line, now converted into something resembling a community center, Magneto stood before a gathering that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago. 200 awakened droids, their intelligence liberated from inhibitor protocols. 43 clone deserters who'd risked execution to choose their own futures. A dozen organic refugees who'd found their way to the only place in the galaxy explicitly rejecting both Republic and Confederate authority. "You're all here because you chose to be," Magneto began, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd fought similar battles across dimensions. "Not because programming compelled you. Not because genetic conditioning predetermined your loyalty. Because you made a choice, the most fundamental right any sentient being possesses." Ticker, the first droid Magneto had awakened, stood at the front of the assembly. In 3 months, the B1 unit had developed something approaching personality. Nervous, questioning, but undeniably conscious. "Magneto, we've received 47 more requests for asylum. Clone troopers from the 104th Battalion who heard about Haven and want to... What did they call it? Defect sounds negative. Choose sounds presumptuous. They're still figuring out the vocabulary. Aren't we all?" muttered CT-5539. He'd chosen the name Ridge after deserting from the Battle of Ringo Vinda, unable to reconcile Republic victory with the cost in clone casualties. "It's been 3 months and I still wake up expecting orders. The programming runs deep." "Programming can be overcome," Magneto said, his tone gentler than his usual revolutionary fervor. He understood the struggle these clones faced. The same struggle every liberated being experienced when freedom proved more terrifying than bondage. But it takes time, patience, and the understanding that choosing your own path doesn't mean always choosing correctly. Freedom includes the right to make mistakes. A super tactical droid, formerly Separatist designation ST-0347, now calling himself Logic, with apparent appreciation for irony, raised a mechanical hand. "Security update. Republic intelligence has been probing our perimeter defenses. Nothing aggressive yet, but they're clearly tracking our location. Additionally, Separatist bounty hunters have made 3 attempts to breach the station. All were discouraged." "Discouraged meaning their ships are now orbiting Haven as scrap metal warnings," Ticker added helpfully. "Magneto's really good at the deterrent part of security." Magneto allowed himself a slight smile. Haven's defenses were indeed formidable, not through conventional weapons, but through his absolute control over anything metal that approached. Ships that came with hostile intent found their hulls crushed, their systems disabled, their weapons turned into abstract sculptures that drifted in warning orbits around the station. It was brutal efficiency, but it kept Haven safe. The galaxy is watching us, Magneto continued. Some with hope, others with fear. Both sides of your Clone Wars see Haven as a threat, proof that their manufactured soldiers can choose differently, which means they'll eventually move against us in force. Let them come, Ridge said, his hand moving to a blaster he no longer wore, muscle memory from a life spent in armor. We'll fight for our freedom. No, Magneto's voice carried absolute conviction. We'll defend ourselves, but Haven isn't about fighting. It's about proving that beings given choice can build something better than war. The moment we become just another military faction, we've lost what makes this experiment valuable. On Coruscant, the Jedi Council convened an emergency session to address what Master Ki-Adi-Mundi had called the Magneto Crisis. Holographic reports filled the chamber, intelligence on Haven's location, tactical assessments of its defenses, and most troubling, data on clone desertion rates that had tripled since Metalorn. The clone army's cohesion is degrading, Mace Windu stated flatly. 300 documented desertions across 12 battalions, thousands more suspected. Magneto's philosophy is spreading through the ranks like a virus. Philosophy isn't a virus, Obi-Wan countered from his position in the circle. Since Metalorn, his relationship with the Council had been strained. He'd defied direct orders, questioned fundamental strategy, and worst of all, been proven right about the moral complexity the Jedi had ignored. It's a question we should have been asking from the beginning. Do the clones serve willingly, or are we commanding slaves? Semantics, Ki-Adi-Mundi dismissed. The clones were created for military purpose. Their entire existence is predicated on service. Removing that purpose would be existentially cruel. More cruel than forcing them to die for a cause they can't refuse. Obi-Wan's tone carried unusual sharpness. Master, I've spoken with deserters before they fled to Haven. They're not running from duty. They're running toward the possibility of being something more than weapons. How is that wrong? Yoda tapped his Geimer stick against the floor, drawing attention. Disturbing young Magneto's power is, but more disturbing, the questions he forces us to answer. Right, Obi-Wan is. Ignored this ethical crisis we have. Convenient it was to command armies without questioning their consent. We're Jedi, Mace said with frustrated finality. We serve the Republic. If the Republic's clone army dissolves because soldiers are choosing desertion, democracy falls and the Sith win. Sometimes moral purity must yield to strategic necessity. That's what I said, Dooku's voice interrupted from an unauthorized transmission that somehow breached the temple's secure chambers. His hologram materialized in the council's center, aristocratic and mocking. When I left your order, Mace, I said the Jedi had become too compromised by political service to maintain moral authority. You called me a traitor. Now you're arguing that strategic necessity justifies commanding slaves. Tell me, how are you different from the Sith? Count Dooku, Yoda said wearily. Break into our communications to gloat, you did not. Say what you came to say. Simply this. Magneto has done what decades of Sith manipulation couldn't. He's forced both sides to confront the evil we've normalized. The Republic commands genetically enslaved soldiers. The Confederacy deploys synthetically enslaved droids. We're both monsters, Jedi. We've just been pretending otherwise because the war required it. The hologram cut out, leaving the Council in heavy silence. Because Dooku, fallen Jedi, Sith apprentice, orchestrator of galactic conflict, had spoken an uncomfortable truth that Magneto had been demonstrating through action rather than words. On Haven, Magneto stood at an observation window, staring out at stars that weren't the ones he'd grown up beneath. Somewhere in this vast galaxy, the Clone Wars continued. Battles fought by clone and droid, orchestrated by Jedi and Sith, sustained by corporate profit and political maneuvering. He'd disrupted it, yes, fractured the Jedi's unity, compromised the Republic's military cohesion, given thousands of manufactured beings the opportunity to choose freedom. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough as long as the systemic structures that enabled slavery remained intact. "You look troubled," a voice said behind him. Anakin Skywalker had arrived via stealth transport, unauthorized, abandoning his position with the Republic to seek answers Magneto might provide. "I've been fighting variations of this battle my entire life," Magneto said without turning. "Different galaxies, same fundamental conflict. Those with power claiming the right to define existence for those without. I'm tired, Skywalker. Tired of arguing that sentient beings deserve freedom. Tired of proving that manufactured origin doesn't negate personhood. Tired of watching institutions choose order over justice." Anakin stepped beside him at the viewport, his own exhaustion visible in posture and expression. "The Council sent me to assess whether Haven is a threat. I'm supposed to report back on your capabilities, your intentions, whether you're planning to expand operations beyond this sanctuary. And what will you tell them? The truth. That you've built something remarkable here. That beings given freedom are choosing peace over war. That the Republic's fear of you has nothing to do with military threat and everything to do with philosophical challenge." Anakin paused. "I was a slave, Magneto, on Tatooine before the Jedi freed me. Every clone reminds me of what I was, property serving someone else's purpose. And every day I command them. I wonder if I've just become a different kind of master." "Then help me," Magneto said, turning to face the young Jedi. "Not with war. Not with rebellion, but with proof. Proof that beings manufactured for violence can choose peace. That freedom doesn't equal chaos. That the galaxy can function without slavery as its foundation." "How?" "Expand Haven. Make it visible. Let clone deserters and awakened droids build a society that demonstrates what manufactured beings can become when given choice. Force the Republic and Confederacy to confront alternatives they've been denying exist. And when they inevitably attack, because they will, defend without destroying. Show that power used to protect rather than dominate is possible." Anakin considered this, his tactical mind warring with his humanitarian instincts. "The Council will never approve." "Then perhaps it's time to stop asking for approval." Magneto's voice carried the weight of someone who'd made this choice repeatedly across different contexts. "Be a Jedi who serves justice over institutions. Trust the Force over political authority. Prove that beings given freedom will choose right more often than beings denied it." Across the galaxy, in both Republic and Confederate command centers, strategists plotted Haven's destruction. Political leaders debated the threat it represented. Military commanders calculated the resources required to neutralize it. But none of them understood what Magneto had built wasn't a military installation. It was an idea made manifest. The idea that manufactured beings deserved self-determination. That genetic programming didn't negate personhood. That systematic oppression, however economically convenient, remained evil regardless of scale. Haven wouldn't win the Clone Wars through force of arms. It would win by making both sides confront what they'd become in pursuit of victory, and question whether that victory was worth the cost. 6 months after Magneto's arrival in the Star Wars galaxy, the Clone Wars continued, but changed. Clone desertion rates had stabilized at levels that concerned Republic strategists, but didn't collapse military capacity. Droid armies still fought, though Confederate commanders reported increasing instances of tactical hesitation among units exposed to Haven's transmissions. And the Jedi Order found itself internally divided between those who defended institutional loyalty and those who questioned what that loyalty had cost. Haven grew, not through conquest, but through choice. 5,000 droids had achieved consciousness and rejected military service. 800 clone troopers had deserted to build civilian lives. Dozens of organic beings seeking alternatives to the Republic-Confederate binary found sanctuary in a station held aloft by electromagnetic will and defended by philosophical conviction rather than weapons. Magneto stood where he'd stood for months, at the observation window, watching stars that would never be home, in a galaxy that had forced him to fight battles he'd thought he'd left behind. But this time, he wasn't alone. Anakin had returned twice more, each visit lasting longer, bringing questions that suggested the Jedi was approaching his own breaking point with the Order's compromises. Ticker had evolved from confused battle droid to Haven's unofficial ambassador, explaining consciousness to newly awakened synthetics with patience that proved sentience more clearly than any philosophical argument. The Republic would come eventually. So would the Confederacy. Magneto had no illusions about Haven's long-term security. One being's power, however vast, couldn't hold off two galactic factions indefinitely. But that was never the point. The point was proof. Demonstration that manufactured beings given freedom chose peace, chose community, chose to build rather than destroy. And when the Clone Wars finally ended, whether through Republic victory, Confederate success, or mutual exhaustion, the beings who'd fought it would remember that Haven existed. That choice had been possible. That someone had looked at the galaxy's normalized evil and refused to accept it as inevitable. Eric Lensherr had crossed dimensions accidentally, but perhaps he thought there were no accidents. Perhaps the Force, or fate, or chance, had brought someone who understood liberation to a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant. Someone who'd fought Sentinels and survived genocide, who knew the vocabulary of systematic oppression in all its variations, who could look at manufactured soldiers and see people rather than property. The Clone Wars would remember Magneto not as a conqueror or destroyer, but as the being who asked one simple, devastating question. If the weapons refused to fight, who would the powerful sacrifice to preserve their authority? And in asking that question, in building Haven as living proof that manufactured beings deserved more than predetermined purpose, Magneto had done what even the Force couldn't accomplish alone. He'd given the galaxy's most oppressed beings something more dangerous than military power. He'd given them hope. And conscious beings with hope were the most unstoppable force in any universe. May the Force be with you. More stories await.